Very few people knew anything about it. And I found an article that had been written by a retired trapeze artist named Clyde Noble for White Tops magazine in 1950. And it was just a nice little capsule of Bloomington circus history. But it made certain claims about Bloomington circus that I said, well, when did these things happen? When did they happen? How did they happen? Who did this and that? The main claim was that an act called the Flying Return Act had been invented in Bloomington by a guy named Fred.
This is a trapeze movement?
Yeah, it's a trapeze act where a flyer swings off, what they call a flyer, swings off on a fly bar, a trapeze bar, from a pedestal board, does a trick into the hands of a catcher who's hanging upside down by another trapeze. And so then they swing out and back. He returns them to the fly bar and back to the pedestal board, hence the term flying return, which is characteristic of, like the most characteristic circus trapeze act.
I can almost hear music as you're describing that.
Yeah.
Here comes the flying trapeze.
Yeah, I smelled of sawdust and everything. Yeah.
Now, Steve, give us an idea. I mean, but we're talking about circus that was generated, I won't say locally, but regionally, and it was big stuff. I mean, it was very big attraction.
Ringling Brothers came out of Baraboo, Wisconsin. That was their home winter quarters. And there were a number of sites in Illinois that were winter quarters for circus performers, training quarters. And so as I started researching the Bloomington circus history, I started finding some of these different places in Illinois. Petersburg was a huge circus center. Quincy was the home of the W.W. Cole Circus. Then there was Danville, Salem, Illinois. And Galesburg, way back in the 1860s, was kind of the roots of much or most of Bloomington or of Illinois circus activity.
And these circuses would go national? I mean, they would emanate from the towns you just mentioned, but they'd go all over.
Yes. They started out in the 1860s and 70s as small little wagon shows, and they'd go out to these farming communities in Illinois, Iowa, Wisconsin, Indiana, and circulate. Back in those days, transportation was a problem. Mm-hmm. In 1867, a guy named James T. Johnson came to Galesburg with this little wagon show, and he had the idea of establishing ring barns, practice barns in Galesburg, Burlington, Quincy, and Macomb, and traveling up and down, presumably up and down the CB&Q Railroad, which made sense. And then he planned to do this in the wintertime when they ordinarily wouldn't be traveling during the winter or during the tending season, and they could make money during the winter. And he had his own little circus, but he was a great showman, but a terrible businessman. He went broke over and over, and other people bought out all of his equipment at the end of every season. His investors would start a new circus. So there were as many as, I think, 7 different little circuses that came out of Galesburg.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and it brought some of the greatest circus talent in the country under his sphere of activity in Galesburg. But one of them was a young guy named Harry Lampkin, who had run away from home at Petersburg, Illinois, and he became a great performer himself. He took his circus, he went back to Petersburg and built a ring barn there, which wasn't a particular circus itself, but trained different people. He married into a big family of horseback riders, the Lawanda family, and they all came back to Petersburg and trained in his ring barn there. He died in 1886, and his brother, Edward Shipp, took over the ring barn there and began to train people. Some of the trapeze people from Bloomington wintered there and went back to Bloomington with the idea of training people in the YMCA there in Bloomington. Then when they built the YMCA in 1907, then they started to organize so that people could train through the winter in the YMCA gymnasium. And that was one of the reasons that Bloomington became a huge center of training for trapeze in particular.
Now, did Peoria take advantage of some of that? I guess it was an audience.
There were a few people from Peoria that went into the circus and actually performed in the YMCA circus that they had every spring before the performers went out on the road. And there were a few people from Peoria there, but the main thing about Peoria, which was a kind of an unrelated topic, was a Wild West show that originated here. A short article was published in the Peoria magazine back in September.
Your article?
Yeah, my article.
Your article.
About the Young Buffalo Wild West show. And that was kind of a separate thing. But Wild West is really closely related to circus.
I was going to say, did it compete for the same audience, or would it have come at a different time?
It kind of competed a little bit, kind of a variety show.
Right.
Jugglers, wire walkers, trapeze, horseback riders. The Wild West show was like a presentation of this sensational, almost like a stage act presented out in the open.
Right.
But one whole, like they'd have the holdup of the stagecoach and the covered wagons going west, and it was all centered around the myth of the American West, and they actually, I think, created that myth. One great Wild West showman, Pawnee Bill, Gordon Lilly was his name, he called himself Pawnee Bill, was born and raised in Bloomington, and he later joined with Buffalo Bill, Cody, and they had a Wild West show of their own called the Two Bills Show, and they were the largest Wild West show ever.
Pretty successful, I would imagine.
Yeah, very successful. Yeah. But the Wild West was kind of waning in the early 1900s when this guy, the Chicago entrepreneur, came down to Peoria, and he established Al Fresco Park.
Oh, yeah.
And
right there on the river.
Yeah. And he brought in a Wild West show to work there, or originated one. And then he started taking it out on the road, and that became the Young Buffalo Wild West show. And he brought in some of the greatest Wild West talent in the country.